Welcome, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, as well as the centennial of Miami's iconic Freedom Tower. Today, we'll travel across centuries, from the birth of the United States in 1776 to the Cuban exodus of the late 20th century, to see how one bold declaration in Philadelphia became a beacon of hope that still shines today. In July 1776, a group of delegates from the 13 British colonies in North America met in Philadelphia's Independence Hall to discuss how they should respond to a series of abuses by the monarch, King George III. It was blistering hot, and they were furious that their rights as British subjects were being violated by the ruler. On the 4th of July, these men signed a document that would forever change the world, the Declaration of Independence. Basing their arguments for independence from British rule on the natural rights theory developed by the English political philosopher John Locke, this proclamation stated that all men are created equal, and that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. These were radical ideas in a world still ruled by kings and emperors. But this wasn't just lofty language eloquently penned by Thomas Jefferson. For the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, it was dangerous. They knew that by putting their names on that parchment, they were committing treason against Britain. The penalty? Death. Yet they signed anyway, choosing liberty over safety. And in time, their gamble paid off. With the final victory over the British at Yorktown in 1781, a new nation was born, one rooted in the promise of freedom. But this bold declaration wasn't just a statement for one time and place. Its ideals echoed far beyond 1776. Across oceans and throughout the centuries, people facing oppression looked to America's founding words for inspiration. The United States became more than just a country. It became a symbol, a beacon of liberty for those who dreamed of a better life. Fast forward nearly 2 centuries to Cuba, 1959. A populist revolution swept through the island. At first, many hoped Fidel Castro would bring freedom. But soon private property was seized, the press was silenced, and political opponents were jailed or executed. For countless Cubans, it felt like they were living under their very own King George III. Their choice was the same as that of the American colonists: risk everything for liberty. But instead of fighting a war, many Cubans chose exile, and their eyes turned north toward that bright beacon of hope, the United States. The Freedom Tower began in 1925 as the headquarters of one of Miami's first newspapers, the Miami Daily News. A bright light atop the 17-story building, the tallest structure in Miami at the time, served as a beacon for ships to find safe harbor in Biscayne Bay. Then, beginning in the 1960s, waves of Cuban exiles crossed the Florida Straits seeking refuge from the tyrannical government that had taken hold of their homeland. Miami became their safe harbor, and one building in particular became their beacon of hope: the Freedom Tower. Known as the Ellis Island of the South, the Freedom Tower welcomed nearly 400,000 Cuban refugees who were processed under the U.S. government's Cuban Refugee Assistance Program. Most of these families arrived from 1965 to 1973 on the so-called Freedom Flights, the largest refugee airlift in American history. More than 260,000 Cubans stepped off those planes and into new lives. Few spoke English, and even fewer had any money. Most came from Cuba's once flourishing middle class: doctors, lawyers, business owners, teachers, and other professionals. They left everything behind to start afresh in a strange land. Inside the cavernous halls of the Freedom Tower, the new arrivals were provided with medical assistance, job referrals, and basic food items: bread, rice, and of course government cheese, until they could secure more permanent accommodations. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For those who walked through the doors of the Freedom Tower, America's founding ideals weren't just abstract words from centuries past. They were a living promise of hope freedom, and prosperity waiting to be fulfilled. Over time, the Freedom Tower, known affectionately as El Refugio or the Refuge, became an iconic symbol of liberty, not just for Miami's Cuban exile community, but for countless other waves of refugees and immigrants seeking their own safe harbor. But what does the Declaration of Independence have to do with the Freedom Tower? Plenty. Think about it. In 1776, a group of British colonists defied a king who violated their natural rights to life, liberty, and property. 200 years later, Cuban families fled a dictatorship that disregarded those very same rights. Both risked everything, both transformed the communities, and both remind us that the words of the Declaration of Independence speak to all people in all times. From Independence Hall in Philadelphia to the Freedom Tower in Miami, the thread is clear. Liberty is not just a historical event, it's a living promise. The American Revolution didn't end at Yorktown in 1781. It continues every time America opens its doors to those who seek freedom and justice. As we celebrate 250 years of the Declaration of Independence, we honor not just the founders, but every generation, like the Cuban exiles, who have tested, renewed, and carried forward the enduring promise of liberty. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May the flame of liberty, first lit in 1776, continue to shine for generations to come.